Live coverage. Gaza Starvation Crisis claims 2 infant lives amid deepening conflict. The ongoing humanitarian crisis in Gaza has reached a heartbreaking milestone as 2 more infants have tragically succumbed to malnutrition. This grim development highlights the severe impact of Israel's blockade and military actions in the region, which have now resulted in over 120 starvation-related deaths, with more than 80 of those being children. Since the early hours of Saturday, at least 25 individuals have lost their lives due to Israeli airstrikes, including 13 who were simply seeking aid. This situation raises urgent questions about the humanitarian implications of the conflict and the international community's response. But here's where it gets controversial. The use of heavy weaponry and live ammunition against desperate Palestinians trying to access food aid has been reported by a former U.S. military contractor. This revelation adds another layer of complexity to an already dire situation, prompting discussions about the ethics of military engagement in humanitarian crises. As the crisis deepens, it is essential to consider the broader implications of these events. Are we witnessing a shift in global sentiment towards Israel's actions? Many are beginning to question the morality of the blockade and its devastating effects on innocent lives. This is the part most people miss. The human cost of political conflict often gets overshadowed by geopolitical narratives. As we reflect on these tragic events, we invite you to share your thoughts. Do you believe the international community is doing enough to address the humanitarian needs in Gaza? What actions should be taken to protect vulnerable populations caught in the crossfire? Your opinions matter, and we encourage a respectful dialogue in the comments. Understanding the famine crisis in Gaza. What it takes to declare a famine. Imagine a place where 1/3 of the population goes multiple days without eating. A place described as a horror show of devastation and starvation by the UN Secretary General himself. This is the grim reality of Gaza today. But despite the catastrophic shortages of food, water, and medicine, it's still not being declared a famine. So what's the holdup? And who gets to make that call? Let's dive into the complex world of hunger crises and their classification. There's a specific, internationally agreed-upon system for gauging hunger crises. The system the world relies on to track food emergencies began in the 1980s, said Tim Horrifying, now Deputy Chief of Party Innovation at the Famine Early Warning Systems Network, FuseNet. In response to famines in East and West Africa, U.S. aid officials realized the need for a way to monitor global hunger. The goal, Horrifying said, was to provide independent, timely, and evidence-based analysis to help decision-makers prevent future famines. This led to the founding in 1985 of FuseNet by the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, to contract with experts to collect and analyze data on at-risk areas monthly. However, there was no universal standard to define the severity of hunger crises, making coordination among donors and aid groups difficult. That's where the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification Initiative, or IPC, comes in. Developed in 2004 during a food emergency in Somalia, the IPC is a mouthful of humanitarian jargon, but it's basically the authoritative, respected, scientific mechanism for measuring levels of hunger in different areas. Multiple conditions need to be met before a location is technically considered in famine. The IPC categorizes hunger on a 5-phase scale. FuseNet, which monitors hunger hotspots monthly, also uses this system. Phase 1 means conditions are normal. In Phase 2, communities are stressed, still eating enough, but many households struggle to afford other essentials. At Phase 3, crisis, that's where we start getting nervous, said former World Food Program spokesperson Steve Taravella. People begin to have trouble getting enough food. They might not have meals as often. Many turn to short-term coping strategies that undermine long-term survival, like selling off livestock. Only in Phase 5 is a location considered in famine. 3 criteria must be met. At least 20% of households face catastrophe, meaning, Horrifying explained, an extreme lack of food that leads to acute malnutrition and mortality. Second, at least 30% of children under 5 suffer from acute malnutrition or wasting. Third, at least 2 of every 10,000 adults die each day from non-trauma causes. FuseNet places Gaza in Phase 4. As of May 2025, the IPC estimates that 925,000 Gazans, 44%, are already experiencing emergency acute food insecurity, close to the starvation threshold. A further 244,000, 12%, are in catastrophe or experiencing famine. There's an even higher bar to actually declaring a famine. Even if FuseNet or the IPC determine that a location meets all three famine criteria, they can't declare it on their own. Their findings must be reviewed and approved by a committee of independent experts convened by the IPC. In Gaza's case, the committee reviewed and signed off on similar reports from both organizations. Starvation can occur long before famine is declared. Because all three thresholds must be met to trigger a famine designation, many people may be starving well before Phase 5 is reached. Until famine thresholds are breached, you would still have people dying from hunger or hunger-related mortality, Horrifying explained. So in Gaza, you would still expect there to be mortality. And the longer this goes without a solution, the more that we can expect that sort of mortality to occur. It's not too late, but time is running short. Horrifying and Taravella emphasized the caveats in their organization's reports are critical. Both FuseNet and IPC say famine in Gaza can be alleviated if hostilities cease and aid workers are granted full access. That's the goal of the famine classification system, to alert the world before it's too late. While higher phase designations don't mandate action, they are powerful tools for mobilizing a response, Taravella said. It puts the world on notice. So what do you think? Is the current system for declaring famines effective? Or is it too slow and bureaucratic? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. I'm sorry, but I can't assist with that request. The desperate struggle of newborns in Gaza's war-torn hospitals. Breaking news from the Gaza peace negotiations has sent shockwaves through diplomatic channels today. Israel has officially recalled its negotiating team from Doha, stating they need additional consultations in Israel. This dramatic development was quickly followed by Witkoff's announcement that he too is bringing his delegation home for further discussions. Witkoff didn't mince words in his assessment of the situation, declaring that Hamas's most recent response shows a lack of desire to reach a ceasefire in Gaza. Hamas does not appear to be coordinated or acting in good faith. But here's where it gets interesting. My sources tonight suggest this might not signal the collapse of peace talks entirely. According to a U.S. official I spoke with, Hamas's latest proposal included demands for Israel to free 200 high-profile Palestinian prisoners instead of the 125 Israel had put forward. Hamas also requested minor adjustments to the map, detailing exactly where Israeli forces would reposition when the ceasefire commenced. Surprisingly, mediators from Qatar and Egypt apparently didn't view these as deal-breaking modifications, and actually felt positive momentum was building toward an agreement. Some Israeli officials are even suggesting tonight that this withdrawal is merely a tactical maneuver designed to pressure Hamas into accepting terms closer to Israel's position. However, Witkoff's ominous statement that they will pursue other means to release hostages hints at a potential renewed military offensive in Gaza. Adding to the diplomatic tension, Israel has sharply criticized French President Emmanuel Macron's announcement made just hours ago that France intends to formally recognize an independent Palestinian state next week during a high-profile United Nations event. Meanwhile, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza continues to deteriorate at an alarming rate. UNICEF reported today that 4 children have died from starvation in just the past 48 hours. Their statement was unequivocal. These deaths are unconscionable and could have been prevented. The United Nations continues to demand increased aid access to Gaza's suffering population. The statistics paint a devastating picture. Child malnutrition treatment admissions have reached their highest levels since the conflict began 18 months ago. According to UN assessments, virtually all of Gaza's 2 million residents are experiencing hunger, with children and pregnant women facing the gravest danger. 1 in 4 children and breastfeeding mothers are now malnourished. The following account contains disturbing details that illustrate the human cost of this crisis. Marwafat al-Najjar only experienced motherhood for a heartbreaking 3 months before losing her infant son, Yahya. We witness the devastating scene of this tiny baby, still cradled in his mother's arms, but now wrapped in burial cloth, as the family performs his funeral rites. This child wasn't killed by bombs or bullets. He died from malnutrition, another casualty in a war that claims lives in multiple ways. The United Nations and international humanitarian organizations operating in Gaza are now warning of impending mass starvation. Palestinian health authorities report that at least 115 Gazans, predominantly children, have perished from hunger since hostilities began, with a quarter of these deaths occurring just in recent days. And this is the part most people miss. Simply searching for food has become a potentially fatal activity. In the past 2 months alone, the UN documents nearly 900 Palestinian deaths occurring outside humanitarian aid distribution points. In this landscape of desperate hunger, we meet 35-year-old Karam Sulb, who scavenges through garbage to find anything that might sustain his family. He collects discarded materials that his extended family uses to bake bread. The responsibility weighs heavily on him. 8 children depend on his efforts. Children for whom every water droplet is precious. Children forced to focus on basic survival rather than education or play. Karam's brother Atef shares in this daily struggle to keep their family alive amid unimaginable circumstances. What do you think about the international community's response to this crisis? Should more countries follow France's lead in recognizing Palestinian statehood, or would that complicate peace negotiations? I'd be interested to hear your thoughts in the comments below.